Interestingly, too, 5 young men were observed dressed in Arab garb across the river, filming the destruction of the World Trade Center. When they were noticed by neighbors who summoned the police, the arresting officer, when he approached the driver in the van, was told, "We are not your problem. The Palestinians are your problem." These young men, who have come to be known as the Dancing Israelis, were incarcerated for over 70 days until they were released by an assistant to then Attorney General John Ashcroft and returned to Israel. They appeared on Israeli television and explained that the reason they were there was to document the destruction of the Twin Towers. The official who released them would subsequently become the head of the Office of Homeland Security, Michael Chertoff, who, like others at a high level involved here, had a joint U.S.-Israeli citizenship. Here you can see that destruction below ground level, and you can also see Building 7 in the background. This is that 47-story building which had the offices of the CIA, Securities and Exchange Commission, the FBI, and a very large block that was owned by the Solomon Brothers, an investment firm. In fact, the building was so solid in its construction that when the Solomon Brothers bought up this number of floors, they actually completely redesigned the interior. This building, in my opinion, is one of the most robust ever constructed in the history of civil engineering, for the reason that it was erected over 2 enormous generators providing backup energy for lower Manhattan. It was therefore designed that it should never collapse. Even in the Twin Towers, the principal steel beams, support beams, were hollowed out at the center, which provides nearly as much support as solid steel beams, but in the case of Building 7, it was constructed using solid steel beams. Here's an example of the very modest fires that occurred in Building 7. There are many oddities related to Building 7, but the official account would claim that it was fires that weakened the structure and that there was a huge diesel tank there in the center of the building. The problem with that hypothesis being that the diesel is not explosive and does not burn at a high temperature. Here is another fire, much more spectacular, that occurred in Los Angeles that burned at a much higher temperature for a much longer period of time, and yet the structure endured and did not collapse. Here you see the sequence of destruction of Building 7. There actually is footage where you can see a series of explosives start at the bottom and work its way up the side. You notice here in the third frame and the fourth, you see this characteristic kink that occurs in a controlled demolition when you take out one of the main support columns to ensure that if it's going to fall one way or another, it will fall inward toward itself. In this case, because it was 47 stories, it fell at free fall speed at approximately 6.5 seconds. Interestingly, unlike the North and the South Tower, all the floors here are collapsing at the same time. All the floors here are collapsing at the same time in an abrupt, complete, abrupt, and total, but symmetrical collapse. In the case of the North and South Tower, each of those floors remains stationary, waiting its turn to be blown to kingdom come, in the memorable phrase of Morgan Reynolds. And notice, after Building 7 is collapsed, we have a pile of residue that's equal to approximately 12% of the height. 12% of 4.7, right? 10% of 47 would be 4.7 plus another 2 or 8/10 or more. So you should have about 5.5 floors, and that's what we had here, about 5.5 floors. So it's utterly consistent with a classic controlled demolition that Building 7 was taken down in that manner. Now, interestingly, Jane Stanley went on the BBC and reported that Building 7, which he referred to as the Solomon Brothers building, had collapsed. But Jane Stanley was making a report at 4:57. The collapse of Building 7 would not occur for 23 minutes more. So that, in fact, we have over her left shoulder, Building 7 is visible in the background. What this means is we are observing a stunning illustration of collusion between the government, the intelligence agencies, and the mass media This is an occurrence the BBC has been unable to explain. Now, if we want to appreciate what happened here and attempt to analyze it, we need to apply the principles of scientific reasoning, which involve 4 steps or stages. Puzzlement, something doesn't fit into your background knowledge. Speculation, consider the full range of alternative explanations. In this case, it might be natural causes, earthquake, hurricane, tornado, human causes, conventional, arson, dynamite, RDX, thermite, thermate, human causes, unconventional, mini nukes, atomic, hydrogen, directed energy weaponry, HARP, lasers, masers, plasmoids, or 4, some other alternative not yet considered. We always have to have a catch-all hypothesis in case those we are examining explicitly doesn't include the true hypothesis because we haven't thought it through, figured it out. Then we adapt the hypothesis to the evidence. The likelihood of an hypothesis, H, given evidence C, is the basic measure of evidential support for scientific reasoning, where the value of that likelihood is equal to the probability of the effects given the hypothesis. In other words, treat the hypothesis as though it were the cause, and ask yourself if the effects are those that would have a probability of occurrence if that hypothesis were true. Then when you have the hypothesis with the highest likelihood is the one that is the preferable hypothesis, and when sufficient evidence is available, the preferable hypothesis is acceptable. Well, let's look at what's going on here. Natural causes look very improbable here because the destruction was so selective. It's as though these terrorists wanted to destroy all and only buildings with a WTC designation. Earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes are not so discriminating. Plus, the form of devastation was quite massive. Here you see very peculiar excavation, as it were, of the core of Building 6 in the top right corner. Below it, you see a series of what Judy has described as cookie-cutter cutouts here. And her students have studied these photographs and found as many as 50 of these cookie-cutter cutouts. Here's Building 4. Half of it's there, half of it's missing. We'll come back to look at them in greater detail. This is in the sub-basement now of the South Tower. And what's interesting to notice is that, according to the hypothesis that this involved conventional explosives, especially thermite, or in its nano-enhanced version, super thermite, which operates at extremely high temperatures, there was a vast pool of molten metal that endured for weeks or even months after the attacks of September 11th. But if that were true, notice that it's very odd to see how we could have pools of water that aren't simmering or boiling, how workers could be walking here at the sub-basement level without their boots melting. There are many reasons to believe that there were no vast pools of molten metal, and therefore if those were the expectable consequences or effects of the use of super thermite, for example, then it seems unlikely that super thermite was the cause of the destruction of these buildings. Notice this huge hole then in the center of Building 6. This is not what you would expect from falling debris from the North Tower, for example, which is here in the foreground and virtually completely gone, in contrast with Building 7 to the left, which, of course, as I observed before, is in a pile of residue approximately equal to 12% of its original height. Here's inside Building 6. You notice there are a few of the support columns that have fallen into this opening. But basically, the entire mass is missing. It's reminiscent to me of when I lost my right kidney. The surgeon took the kidney out and left an open space, which, of course, my other organs filled in. But here we have this open space. It's as though surgery had been performed on Building 6. Here's Building 5 with these cookie-cutter cutouts. And as I've already observed, there were as many as 50. Once again, it's very difficult to imagine how these effects could have been brought about by, for example, falling debris from the North and South Tower. Very odd indeed. Here's Building 4. Half of it's there. Half of it, which should be in the immediate foreground, is completely gone. Completely gone. Completely gone. Here's Building 3, the Marriott Hotel. It's as though some enormous Paul Bunyan took a giant axe and gave it a huge whack. Very odd here. Very difficult to imagine what could have brought about that destruction. In addition, we have hundreds of what Judy has referred to as toast